Okay, so welcome to Your Irish Connection with Lora O'Brien. We're having chats about how we do these Irish spirituality things. And I am here with my friend Oein DeBhairduin. Now, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah,
DeBhairduin.
DeBhairduin. It almost sounds like a happy pirate.
Happy Pirates. I love it. I love it. Okay, well, you're very, very welcome now. I did do an interview with Oein for a previous project, and
You did indeed.
I found you absolutely fascinating now, I have to say. And I think that was the first time no, it wasn't the first time we'd met in person. We'd met
No, we met through Philip Drake a few
Drake,
times.
of course,
Yeah,
yeah.
and then there's casual kind of encounters in different spaces. But I think it's the first
Yeah,
time we actually had tea.
it
And
is,
that's
it
when you
is.
know you met someone.
That's
And
it,
tea.
that's it. And we had a lovely chai tea actually that day. It was
Yeah, actually
gorgeous
quite nice.
in Dublin. So you are very, very welcome to our Irish Connection series interviews, Oein. I'm delighted to have you here. And there's a few lovely pictures, lovely
Oh, I'm
photos.
telling you, just look at the hair and the beard line. Stunning, stunning.
You are a stunning young man.
Yeah,
And I
every
had to
compliment.
include, I had to include your Facebook profile so that people actually know what they're looking at if they go looking for you
Ah,
on
yes.
Facebook. So that is your current Facebook profile. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, that is subject to change for anybody catching up with this on the YouTubes later on. But our Oein now is an absolutely fascinating character. So we are going to begin. So, Oein, when and where did your interest in Irish spirituality begin?
Um, Now, I think actually identify a singular point of where Irish spirituality, living in Ireland, being from Ireland, especially from a nomadic community that's indigenous and ethnic to the population, those expressions, those understandings, those sense of creative engagements with the land and the lore and the people, has always been there. I think though I became more assertive around, I suppose, that engagement when I was around 12-ish. I became involved with a local horticulture group of all things, and it really hit home that kind of bond between space, land, and people,
Hmm.
and how we interact, and not only interact, I suppose, in the mental plane, but really interact in a really physical living space. And that's where I think that it really stirred the embers to be more of a flame,
Hmm.
rather than kind of a practice or kind of a structure that you're taking part in, but it may not fully understand or really engage with.
Hmm.
And so kind of that would have happened in Clunatua, which is a Tirboy side of in kind of Galway, just outside of Tuam.
And what year would that have been now? What age would you have been? Or
Oh, I would have been, I think, 12. You're looking at 96. Yeah, you're looking at 96, 97. Kind of
right?
that kind of that got showing my age, which is young. You know,
Yeah.
I'm claiming I'm in my extreme late 20s.
Only a baby, sure. You're only a baby.
Only a little thing. And
Um,
so kind of the situation we were in, especially kind of the socioeconomic kind of status of that community, influx of new people, and developing around the LTAC, which is local travel accommodation consultancy committees, had really kicked off. So there was a lot more, I suppose, urbanization of families, including my own. There was a lot more kind of encounters with the wider community. So I think there was the reflection of differences, and with those differences, I suppose really exploring and celebrating the colourful history and the differences in them, and the excitement of um, the vast array of the Irish spirituality and Irish connection. Because I think that especially people outside of the country, there's a very streamlined, it's almost like a singular thread.
hmm.
And my experience has been there's multiple threads kind of woven quite beautifully throughout the country. And actually, when the time we actually went for tea was the first time we actually talked about I suppose the what we call the traver situation. And I would quite often lament how no matter how many books I had read about Irish spirituality and creativity, and from anything from the shamanic practices to kind of Llewellyn 101, there was an aspect of the community which is sizable, like 47,000 people, that had never been mentioned, that had
Hmm.
never really reflected on. And going, there's a whole host of a living connection to something that's older um, than most people realize. That had actually been just ignored. And what something you said is that people just simply don't know,
Hmm.
because again, most of the stuff that we hear and read about ourselves are really from us, are really from their authentic living voices within the country.
Yeah. Oh, we have a freeze there now. Hang on. I
Oh,
heard up until authentic living voices in the country. I don't know if that got caught on the recording there or not. If you had
Okay.
anything, sorry.
I was just identifying how that itself is problematic for when we're engaging of what our sense of first identifying what is Irish spirituality, identifying what that means to us in order to explain to other people how we may start on that journey or explore that journey a bit more. And I think that that disconnect often happens because it's not from the native voices. It's from an external view of critique, and some of it is amazing and some of it is incredibly valuable. But unless there's that connection to the land, to the people, and to the actual living culture, it's only ever going to be an echo rather than something that was his own voice.
Absolutely, and that's something that you and I are very much on the same page about. And it's kind of a bit of a life's mission, I think, for both of us now at this point, to try and raise those, the native voices, because we do have a problem and like in your community and in the wider community, we have a problem of not valuing what we have, and we don't have the context for it. And I mean, that is such it's such a post-colonial hangover, really, that we have, where our own culture has been devalued for so long, that it just goes into the generations, and it goes into your, it's there in the collective unconscious, it's there in the mindset, it's there in the personality. It's literally been beaten out of us that we would have anything to value, and it's a huge problem, and it's a huge problem we all see. And we've chatted about that before, where there's the, there's the sure, I wouldn't have anything of interest, or I wouldn't have anything to say, and people dismissing themselves and all that kind of stuff.
Or the
but then
embarrassment of it as well.
Oh yeah.
It'd be the sheer embarrassment of like, oh no, I wouldn't believe something like that now. That'd be awful foolish. When there's a connection. But rather like, no, that's foolish to think of such things,
Yeah, and dismissing it, and dismissing like lived experiences as well, that are, that would be so valuable if they're viewed or expressed to people outside of that kind of that that hangover, that trauma that we still kind of, that cloud that we live under, but yeah, the dismissing of your own voice, your own experience. And we see it in the way, like, our kind of our Irish spirituality is, we're looking outside of ourselves all the time, and it's a shame, and it's a travesty, and thank you.
Oh no, sorry, I'm terrible for interrupting.
No, you're grand. No, I was just going to say thank you for being one of the voices that's standing up, and sharing, because, the other side of it as well is that it's often a private thing, or it's often a family thing, and, or a smaller community, and we are still a small kind of tribal type of people, and it takes the courage, and it takes the wherewithal to actually stand up and say, right, well, I'm going to actively kind of share this, and I'm going to make sure that this is maybe available, and it's something that's quite private, so thank you for doing the interview and for doing the work that you do.
Thank you very much, Laura. Well, that's quite kind of you to say.
I really appreciate it, and I really value it. And and I think before we had that interview, like, I mean, I kind of theoretically knew that all of that was there, and your traditions and your culture, your community, and all that. But again, there isn't that kind of that connection with the modern Irish pagan community, never mind even outside of our own country, so anything that I can do to help kind of foster that, and
you might regret that, but okay. Definitely saving that up.
Oh, and I want you to write a book. I want you to, I will interview every fucking week if you want, anything that I can do, honestly, because there's, there's a lot, and we will get to it, obviously, but there's a lot that we were talking about that day that, that, like I said, I just didn't know. And I didn't have the understanding that, I mean, theoretically I knew, but I didn't understand, so I suppose maybe we should probably back up again, just for interview purposes. Do you want to give a little bit? Now, I know we gave a little bio and profile of that on the interview, but just for anybody who hasn't seen that, do you want to give a little bit about your background and where you're coming from, and what is this traveling community, or your community, or how should we term it, or all of those things, that good stuff?
So proudly, as we kind of clan as it is from Galway,
Hmm.
the actually this year on the 1st of March, the indigenous ethnic kind of traveling, which you also use the words like Pavi and Mincair,
Mm.
were actually finally acknowledged by the state as being an
Yeah,
ethnic minority, which is
yeah,
beyond
it was
a
amazing.
triumph for
Yeah.
50 years of continually reinforcing the idea that we're not a failed settled people, and quite
Hmm.
clearly not famine, and and all these bizarre notions that had been so invested by the wider community of, we will fix you, rather than going, we're part of the beautiful tapestry that is Ireland, and
Yeah,
it's a failure for Ireland itself to ignore some of its own children because of the lack of trust or the suspicion of, what do you mean you move?
yeah,
You need to know exactly who you are, and it's 8 generations of it. Otherwise, we don't trust you.
yeah.
And yeah, and kind of exploring that can be a very, very powerful thing, not only for ourselves, but how we relate to ourselves and to our spirituality and to our communities, because I think the Ireland that we are often taught, even in our schools here in Ireland, is not the Ireland of our own people. It's
Mm.
not our actual. No, it's the very colonial version of it that we try to bridge, kind of going, we're more respectful because
Mm.
we want to be respectful and kind of calm, rather than like going, we are passionate, wild people, and
Yeah.
rather than tame that, and rather than to hide and conclude that it's a failure for our engagements, we should celebrate it. We should
Mm.
absolutely celebrate it, because that is who we are, and that was always who we're meant to be, rather than kind of tipping one's hat. And I, at the start of this, I actually quite honestly kind of had a conversation with yourself, going, "We might curse." I was like, "We might curse. It might happen." And I think those things that we put safeguards on ourselves, how we relate to one another. But yeah, my community, it has a diverse understanding. Again, there's 47,000 people. There's multi-ethnical backgrounds as well within it, because other people join the community in different ways. So
Mm.
it's founded, I believe, under 8 principles, and 8 principles is the common genetic history, language, clothing, spiritual religious practices, engagement of journey and travel nomadism, animals, and I believe clothing. I think I may have forgotten one or overlooked it, but these are the main
Yeah.
principles that we have been reviewing, debating, having external experts judge and weigh for 50 years. And finally, Ireland saw the light of day and realised, actually, we've always known, but now we want to actually celebrate it,
Yeah.
which is a
And
long time coming.
it's it really has been, and it's far too long now. It's far too long coming. But just for anybody who's kind of catching up with this on the YouTubes later on, I will actually put links down below to further resources for anything that Owen would like to share if people want to explore further or learn more about the native culture, the nomadic culture of Ireland. Um, and Owen, I'm just going to say now and just kind of get it out there. I'm terrified of getting the terminology wrong.
Absolutely.
And being offensive, and like there's such a there's such a horrible attitude still to your people in this
Hmm.
country, like, and it really is fucking shocking now, to be honest, and still like the embedded racism and bigotry that you must have grown up with, and people still face, and it's just it's horrific. And I'm not going to, like, prostrate myself and beg apology for it, but I am actually like really afraid that I'm going to say something wrong or be offensive or that kind of thing. So I'm just going to, I will apologize once for now and
No, no,
just get
there's
it
no
out
need
of
to
the
apologize.
way.
I think there's actually a Travis specific saying that no one insults without intent. Words come cheap.
Right. I'm getting a few gaps here, and I don't know if that's going to be picked up on the recording. We are. You're
Reasonable
frozen.
people will adjust their behaviour. It may need to a little bit more exploration of the term and use and how pervasive it is. But most people, I believe, are good people who just need to go kind of be reconnected that there are other good people too, and that
Mm,
what you know about them may not necessarily be a reflection of who they are, rather than who you fear they are.
yeah.
And so kind of going. I can't feel like I can accept your apology because I don't think one is outstanding, but I very much welcome the intention.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think, you know, you're dead right, and it is kind of, it's as we're learning and kind of reintegrating and building bridges between the communities, like that's all we can do is just try and be mutually respectful and learn as much as we can, and you know, keep our intent and our awareness straight, and I suppose, sure, what else can we do, you know?
Yeah, and be open, because there's things we all say that that kind of turn the cusp of other people's ears because we just don't know better. And I
Yeah,
think that once we're informed, most people try their best. And
yeah,
that's all we can really ask of people, is to try their best to be as, I suppose, honest and open and, I suppose, transparent in our wish to be kind to one another.
yeah.
Jesus, we're fierce deep this evening.
we
Yeah.
are, we are. Sure, sure. What of it? It's grand.
Yeah.
Between the cursing and the philosophy now, we'd be doing all right. And I suppose there's an intersection then, you know, talking about all this, there is an intersection between the LGBT community as well, which I know you're a part of as well as myself.
Indeed.
So, you know, there are kind of models, I suppose, that we can, you know, we can work with, and that kind of, that openness and that respect and that, you know, honoring the other person. It's all we can do, and you know, we're not kind of fishing around in the dark, even if we don't have direct experience with somebody's particular community. There are other ways that we can learn, you know, how to be respectful and how to interact with, and
And never being afraid to be wrong.
yeah,
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 never been afraid to be wrong.
yeah, and just keep a good heart about it all, you know.
Yeah.
um okay, so just maybe back to the question.
Oh God, yeah, God,
So,
we're
we
pure
do,
Irish chatting
yeah,
here.
yeah, oh,
Yeah.
grand, going on rambles. So what about your connection then, or your experience to the Irish pagan community? Where did that begin? And like, where does, because I try, and when I do these interviews, I try and kind of fit people into the big picture, because we all kind of come into it with different way, or from different directions, or in different ways, or at different time periods. And there has been a very kind of direct progression of paganism in Ireland, if you like, or kind of open paganism rather than the natural stuff that we've been doing for a long time. So, like, let's call it maybe neo-paganism, for want of a better term. So where did your interaction with the neo-pagan community in Ireland begin? What age were you, or how did that start?
Earlier. And my family would have been quite kind of engaged around pilgrimages, rather than just to kind of Roman Catholic sites, but to the elder sites, just like the kind of stone circles and dominoes. And we'd often actually casually meet people,
Mm,
and who are often the most kind of kind and kind of inviting off kind of people that we would randomly meet,
mm,
because of the idea of there's that sheer connection of, oh, you recognize something as being beautiful, when at
yeah.
the time was just absolutely overlooked. It is overlooked now,
Mm,
but then I think there's the community held a space, all of Irish community, I suppose, especially the elder community, held a space of reverence. But as the years shift, the kind of that went off. So my family still had that connection. We were very welcomed. Throughout college, there was a few people that I connected in. There was a local group. Things started to become, I suppose, a bit more engaged around 10 years ago, when I connected with a group in Cavan,
mm.
through this lady called Sharon. Sharon, who's amazingly beautiful, powerful.
Sharon
Um,
Casey, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
very, very
Yeah.
open-minded, open-hearted, and in a very kind of, I suppose, a collective group.
Mm,
And where we explored very respectfully different traditions and approaches. And Sharon would have an Alexandrian kind of background, but had far wider, I suppose, experiences and kind of discussions and kind of her own journey. So I think that fostered a deeper welcome for myself, for the community, to be, I suppose, more prepared, that the hostility that I may have expected wasn't always there.
mm.
And I think, especially connecting with Sharon and the group, and how very much open it was, and how it developed and continues to develop, um, I think it allowed me a lot more freedom to connect in with people. So at the time, like, there was did you have like the children of kind of Artemis Online, and the kind
Yeah.
of some forums, and kind of the Cult Ireland kind of set up, I think, set up by Dean Wilson,
Mm.
and there was a few other kind of groups. So I dip in and dip out. It never, even now, kind of can never quite commit myself to a regular attendance of a moot. Would want to, but life can often be far too busy.
Yeah, yeah. And that's fair enough. I mean, you know, if we shouldn't be doing things because we feel we should be doing them, if that makes sense, you know. So
Very
if
much
it's
so.
not suiting you, then it's not suiting you, you know, it's
And
grand.
I think there's also the trait of people that, especially in Ireland, there's still a lot of the old festivals like Slow, Puck
Mm,
Fair, and there's a lot of pagans I know who gravitate to those spaces,
mm,
who I usually only meet in those spaces,
mm.
which is quite nice to having that connection and those discussions. Sometimes
Yeah,
casual, sometimes quite deep.
yeah,
Um, Always exciting though. Always quite
yeah,
exciting.
yeah. And sure, those old fairs that, and just for anybody who's not familiar, Owen mentioned two major horse fairs, primarily, I suppose, but they would have
Mm.
originally been just pure pagan festivals, like, and
Oh,
they're a
Armine and Puck.
direct, yeah. I mean, they're a direct carry on now, from, you know, from ancient times. I think the Ballinasloe one is a little bit different. I know that started in Roscommon, actually. So I've often wondered, because it was Plunkett, around Castle Plunkett. It was the guy who, the landlord there, um, there was a horse fair that ran there. And I've often wondered, is that actually a direct remnant from the fairs of Cruachan, right?
Okay.
Where, now this is total
Oh
my,
no, I haven't
you
considered
know,
this
yeah, yeah. So the fairs at Cruachan would have moved to his estates. And
one. Okay.
then in whatever year it was, his wife took a fucking figeri and decided that she didn't want the riffraff on her estate. And it was moved over to Ballinasloe, which was their summer estates, you know, more fucking stolen land. Um, but that's why it ended up in Ballinasloe. But there is that direct connection back to Rathcroghan. And Castle Plunkett, as the crow flies, is maybe 5 miles from the main mound at Rathcroghan, which obviously is the big place for the Éanach, the old Éanachs. And there's huge lore about the gatherings at Cruachan and the
I had
plains of,
never connected those. I did not know that
yeah,
history.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
knew it had moved. I didn't know why it had moved.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So
Okay. I need to think about that. I need to think
yeah,
about that.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I like check the, like, I used to live near Castle Plunkett, and that's how I heard the story about the fair. You know, that it had started in, and obviously it triggered with me then knowing the history of Cruachan. But I've never heard anybody else making that connection now. So that is totally off the top of my head, obviously.
Yeah.
But you know, it would be an interesting one now to look into and see how far back the history can be traced when it was in Roscommon, you know, and where it kind of started there. Because, like I said, there's so much in the lore about the Éanach, the old fairs that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that would have been around the festivals, and they were all fucking pure pagan. Like, they were
Oh, very much so.
all the community, you know, the fire festivals particularly.
But
So
even kind of the market days and
mm,
a lot of the trading spaces happened on the feast days of different parishes,
yeah,
and a lot of those I suppose local saints
mm,
were direct I suppose reinterpretations of the elder gods and the
mm,
older kind of the echoes of life, and over time that became more sedated with I suppose gradual disassociation of where they started from.
mm,
But even now, a lot of the old market spaces and trading spaces are gone. But the feast days are still celebrated in many
yeah.
different parishes and communities, and I think that's quite beautiful.
Yeah, it is. And there's so much, I think, that modern pagans kind of dismiss because it's Catholic, or it's couched in Catholic
Mm.
terms at least, you know. But it's pure pagan, like, when you scratch the surface of it, you know. And I often I I laugh. I don't really laugh, but, you know, I often find it interesting that, like, I'd be bringing a tour around, say, around Rathcroghan, around to the well there, which is one of the, as far as I know, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly there's a lot of your community who would show up
Yes,
there on a regular
very
basis. You
strongly.
know, it's, yeah, so it's one of the, I think it's on some kind of circuit or whatever. Sorry, I'm getting it
Oh
wrong
no no
again,
no
but
no no!
yeah.
It's actually called a circus.
Yeah.
Keep into it.
So, but I always find it fascinating because I start my tour of Rathcroghan there, and, you know, kind of connect people almost back through the history. And I always show them the altar inside in the thing, in the obelisk thing that's there. Now, for anybody who's not familiar, we're talking about
Which one
Rathcroghan in
basically?
County
Yeah.
Roscommon. It's a place called Oghalla Well, which is just outside Tulsk village. That's Tulsk. Um, and it's a fascinating place. There's a triple spring there, which is pure pagan energetically, like, and it's been kind of covered over with St. Patrick and the obelisk that the Pope said mass in, and there's a whole kind of Christian
They
tradition, and
tried. They tried.
they did,
They tried.
but again, you scratch the surface, and I would often bring people in to, and particularly since we did that interview, I've kind of, it's very much in my mind where I'd bring people in to the shrine inside and show them, like, that this is the community that is still like making the offerings and burning the candles and showing up and doing the pilgrimage to the shrine, to the place, to the waters. And again, just connect people back in, because that is the living tradition that is still here on the land, and it's disconnected from modern paganism in a lot of ways, and that's work that we need to do to reconnect that in.
Yeah,
If
I think that there's a lot of work that continues, and a friend of mine who's from the community often says, just stick a Holy Mary on it. Just stick a Holy Mary on it, and you will be fine. And that's not to be disrespectful of kind of Roman Catholic, kind of the
yeah,
history and how it's
yeah,
been combined and
yeah,
explored. But it's almost like going, there's no sense of fear. It's like going, if you have someone like that on your side,
yeah,
just get in there and light those
yeah,
candles, talk to who you
yeah,
need to talk to.
yeah,
And I think that there's certain spaces within Ireland, especially with the old, like the well stuff, that you can tell travelers have been there. There's a
yeah,
sense of going, we have been here. And
yeah,
often when I talk to people, especially around kind of the diversity within the communities and how the kind of the expressions, especially along the lines of Irish spirituality, it's just very hard to describe that difference at times, but I
mm,
think most people see it and witness it and kind of almost feel it, going, yeah, there's definitely been travelers here
yeah,
somewhere. And
yeah.
it may be how we kind of iconize. There's a lot of kind of family photos and there's reverence of the
Oh,
but also the engagement of their living spaces. They're not places just to go and just, oh, isn't it lovely? Like, you get in there and you get your hands dirty. You
there's the
feel the soil.
interaction. Yeah.
You plant stuff. You light real candles. Like, you invest.
Yes.
Um, there's power in, like, I think one of the biggest sacrifices we have is effort,
Mm.
actual work, actual. Yeah. I mean, you can sit there and you can light all your candles, but if you have carried that candle, if you have sat with it, if you have picked it with a purpose, and if you light it and wait for it and watch every flicker, that's a sacrifice of time and energy rather than going, yeah, light a candle, off I go. And
Oh, Owen, it's so funny now you should mention that, particularly in the context of the well that we're just talking about, because one of the things I do now, when I used to live there, I used to live in Roscommon and work in Tulsk, and I'd go up almost on a daily basis, but certainly every couple of days, and it wouldn't be more than a week had pass, and I'd go up and I'd clean up around it, and I'd
yeah,
always kind of put the bit of effort in, and not just kind of show up and do the nod and fuck off
yeah,
again. Um, but since I haven't been there, I went up one of the times with a group, and it was actually with Vivian of Lancy Sky Travel, one of her groups. Thankfully, because I think if I had brought a CIE tour up there now, and I had have asked them, because what I did was, the well was all choked up with the green, the water weed
yeah,
stuff. Yeah, yeah. So and it was literally, there was a blanket on top of the well. The water wasn't flowing hardly, through
yeah.
it. So I made them all get in and clean
Yeah,
it
get
all
in
out,
there. Yeah,
get in there. And it's actually become a tradition there, because so every time I bring a tour up to Rathcroghan, they're getting in the fucking water, and they're like, I swear to God, they're taking off their trousers, and they're climbing in their knickers, and they're cleaning everything out. They're walking across the stones to dump all the weeds on the far side, where they'll rot down and they're safe
yeah.
and everything. And the whole place gets cleaned out every single time. And I do think that that's very much something that was asked of me from the site. And
Mm-hmm.
I, again, it's definitely that there's the living culture there. There is that investment. There's people who show up, and people pull up and they're in vans and they've got their families, and and there's local people, like local settled
But you
people
build a
as well.
relationship. You don't come and use a space or use a person.
Exactly,
You
exactly.
have to build a relationship. Like I know there's certain wells that there's a committed belief that you have to visit at least 9 times, at
Right,
least 9 times over, like, and maybe once a year, to get anything from the well.
right.
So the idea is like going, like, if you want this, you have to invest.
Mm,
And you kind of, it's not just playing the long term game. You have to show that you really want something, but also you have to be incredibly respectful
mm,
of the space, of its connections, of its history, of what it wants. Rather than they come, I've come for something, give it to me, off I go. Like, you need to bring something.
yeah.
Sometimes that might be candles, sometimes that might be time, sometimes that might actually be
Mm.
This is my experience, and if I
Mm.
can get any peace, happy. If I can't, I'm still here, I'm still raw, I'm still looking. And I
Yeah.
think that connection is very much alive. That we don't often discuss it. I don't think we often kind of verbalize it very well. But I don't think anyone would ever doubt that that community maintains that
Yeah.
very living connection, even if he doesn't quite understand it
Yeah.
at times.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like a lot of it, and more than in any other generations in Ireland at the moment, like there is that kind of loss. There's that gap. You know,
Yeah.
we've got that. We've lost part of that connection, and it's one of the biggest kind of pieces of work that that the goddess that I work for, the Morgan, you know, gave me when I first kind of signed on with her,
Mm-hmm.
was get that, you know, get the next generation, because we've lost a generation, you know, and
Yes.
I had to start fucking working with kids for my sins, you know, but you know, it's obviously valid and worthwhile work, but there is a lot of it to do, you know, there's a lot of that work to do.
Oh, there is, but we don't need to go far, especially in Ireland, or regardless where you're in the world, to find sacred, powerful places.
Yeah.
Like I'm living in Clondalkin now for a couple of years, and there's an old man living around the corner called Peter
Mm.
who keeps Clondalkin well. He
Mm.
walks on every morning, unlocks it, ties any leaves, puts away anything that needs to be put away, tie up any candles. He leaves any offerings that are there, and every night he returns and he locks up. He doesn't see himself as a well keeper. He doesn't see
Mm.
himself as having a sacred duty.
Mm.
If you would disrespect the well, he would probably cut you and bury you.
Mm.
So on one level, that going the unconscious level, no, it's just something that he does.
Yeah.
On another level, he has a powerful relationship with that space.
Yeah.
That even if I want to bring people down, I often say I'm bringing people down,
Yeah.
just so
Yeah.
you know, because
Yeah.
that connection has been maintained for over 50 years.
Yeah. And it's that
And
kind of natural guardian relationships that
yes,
so many of us have at the
and we're all
site.
very aware of. And like
Mm.
I was very surprised when I moved here, because the well is quite kind of hidden off a kind of a very
Mm.
main road, that people were very aware, like, oh no, that's Peter. That's
Mm.
what Peter does. You know,
Mm.
and it was a full freedom of, yep, that's what Peter does. We don't
Yeah.
have to explain it. We don't have to go into it. That's just what Peter does.
Yeah.
And it quite makes him quite happy, and the community quite happy.
Yeah, and I mean, for people who aren't familiar, like Clondalkin is a suburb of Dublin, really. You know,
Yes.
it's so it's a very urban area. You know, we're not talking about some fucking bog in the back of nowhere.
Oh no,
Like, you
no.
know, this is a thriving urban area and community. So, you know, this is like when we're talking about scratching the surface and you find this stuff, like we're not fucking kidding around, you know, it's
No.
all right there. Might not be called paganism, but it's right there, you know.
Yeah, very much, and very much alive. Very much alive, because I think a lot of stuff, we do reflective pieces of how people did it in the past. I think
Mm.
the past was beautiful, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that reason isn't always the best, but we need to learn from that to understand why we've changed,
Yeah.
and then kind of reconnect when we can reconnect, but also celebrate the traditions we have now, because they're
Yeah.
just as valid.
Yes. Yeah. And it's one of the things when I kind of started tapping into the online community, particularly like, you know, Celtic or Gaelic traditionalists or Reconstructionists or any of those kind of, which were primarily, in fairness, American groups,
Mhm.
some Australian actually at the time, but I'm talking back to kind of Yahoo groups days, you know, and I'm coming on as a kind of a very instinctive Irish practitioner who
Yes.
the only group that I had access to at the time, I mean, this is in the 90s, you know, was a traditional Wiccan coven with Barbara Lee. So I'm kind of 18, 19 and trying to find something more kind of that's resonating with me more naturally, if you like, than the Wiccan traditions, which I got a lot of value out of and I learned a
Yes.
lot from, and I'd never disrespect them. Um, but obviously, then, you know, trying to tap into these kind of groups who would academically know a lot more than me at the time, it really didn't do a lot now for my tip in the hat kind of native, you know.
Oh no, I mean, like
Uh,
there's I think there's the two sets of knowledges. There's the ancient archives, and
mm,
then there's our own elders,
mm,
and we are the elders of the future. And there's a sense of sometimes we diminish the
mm,
heritage we bring with us, and the
yeah,
understanding we bring with us, because someone else has written about it differently.
yeah,
And rather than celebrating, going, yeah, that person may have written about it differently in a very different cultural context, most likely by a man,
yeah,
very disconnected, who most likely was of wealth.
yeah,
So there's all these additional barriers, and I think most have of their own kind of spiritual or political view
yeah,
of kind of the common people,
yeah,
and that can really disconnect us. And
Yeah.
also, I know that in my own area space, I'm not sure it was like yourself, it was a little bit intimidating
Yeah.
because the person I was inviting was all the, I know more than you do, and I don't
Yeah.
tell me about your Irish. I know
Yeah.
about you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And dismissing that kind of living tradition, and dismissing the now we're kind of like, we're at a phase now where, in one sense, like, there's kind of no excuse for not knowing the stories, because they're all available online,
Oh,
and
they're all online.
you need to put the work in, and you need to know the lore, if you're interested in it. You absolutely need that, and you need that kind of, whether you're academic or not, there's accessible stories there, and
Entirely.
there's no excuse. um the other thing then is, you have your kind of your personal gnosis, your experiences, all of those kind of mad fucking flights of fancy that we all have when we're having these experiences, and they may or may not be, real, like
Yes.
whatever that means.
But they need the framework of a history to apply them to.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got that coming on, but then you've also got this living tradition that we're talking about, where and it's a strand where, where you're dealing with communities outside Ireland, and pagan communities particularly outside Ireland. It's the one that's always disregarded, or disrespected, to be perfectly honest, because there is still this fucking colonial mentality, and we're seeing it really in Brexit now, and we're seeing it in a lot of kind of what's happening in the world, where it's like, it's that attitude of, you Irish need to just know your place, and
Yes.
shut up and sit down and just be funny over there, because that's your place, and just get on with things, but don't be interfering with the big boys over here. um and it's horrible. It's actually fucking horrible, but it's very real, and it's still very relevant for us. It's still an attitude that we're running across. um but it is a strand that I have found a lot of modern pagans to ignore. And when, even with the burgeoning awareness, and I've talked about this now till I'm blue in the face, and it's something I want to kind of get back to for your community as well. Even with the burgeoning awareness around trying not to appropriate other cultures, whether that's I mean, obviously the native, the first tribes, the First Nations
Yes.
in America would be an obvious one, but it hasn't quite filtered into not appropriating the Celtic cultures.
Oh.
And things are just kind of taken willy-nilly and out of context, and just robbed and freaking raped now, to be honest, and totally
Pillaged and
abused.
plundered.
Yep. And it's kind of, it's that last bastion of, and obviously we're white, and there is a difference, and there's a huge difference in the history, and I'm not in any way comparing Ireland to any of the other cultures who have been colonized, because everybody has their own experience. But it is something that, I've been shouting about for a long time. Like, you can't appropriate Irish culture either. You can't just
No.
take what you want. And it's one of the points that I wanted to actually bring up with you, because, like, we're talking about connecting in to your community, and what I don't want to see is a situation where like modern Irish pagans just start pillaging and plundering from your community either. Like, it needs to be kind of side by side, and it needs to be consenting, and a very, and it's an awareness that I'm kind of bringing to that as well.
And I think it has to be done in a very open partnership. Otherwise, those lines would be very quickly crossed. Very,
Yeah.
very quickly crossed,
Yeah.
and very easily crossed. But I think celebrating and appropriation and appreciation are sometimes very difficult to
Yeah.
separate. And
Yeah.
the only way around that is consent. And we will never
Yes.
get full consensus of consent from any community.
Of course
But
not.
if you're working with someone off that community, that connection is there, and also that understanding and the exploration, rather than having read it somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's more about going, I want to share this experience. I want to be a part of it. And is that appropriate? Sometimes it's wonderful. Other times it is not appropriate. It is not appropriate.
And I suppose, I mean, in our context, the difference would be, like, if I turned around and wrote a book about, native traveler magic, or whatever the fuck I was going to call it, and, even whether I fucking referenced you or not, or gave you credit or anything like that, that would be appropriation on my part, and obviously it's not something I'm going to do.
Yeah,
But
and highly offensive to the community,
of
because it would
course, yeah.
be in the wider scheme of thing, it would be kind of a majority community that at times has been very oppressive. Now
Hmm.
deciding we want this aspect of you, we don't
Yes.
want the other
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's just hard to deal with. We rather take the nice, casual, romantic side
yeah.
that actually
The bits we like.
dehumanizes a bit more.
Yeah,
Because if you have more spirituality, you can survive better, and rather than deal with the
yeah.
actual hard living facts of people.
Yeah, and like that's kind of appropriation, I think, in a
Mm,
nutshell, in any culture, in any context. So like the other side of that, then the appreciation is where, we're here and we're having a chat,
yeah.
and you get to speak your truth, and you get to represent. And if you ever get around to writing a book,
I feel the
if there's anything that I can do to help and support that, I would
yes.
be only fucking delighted to do it. But I'm not going to put my name on that book. You know what I mean? And I think that's where the difference is, where it's coming from. And if you kind of widen that scope then and widen that context to if something is native Irish, if there's a native voice that is teaching or speaking or writing or willing to share that, then you don't just come along and fucking take it
No.
and do it yourself, especially not to earn money off or turn it to any kind of commercial value. And
Which is
it's
quite a common thread within our
mm,
community, especially among our authors.
yeah, yeah.
Like for instance, going, I see a difference between someone who's Irish and someone who's American Irish. I don't
Hmm.
see it as having less or more value. I just
Mm,
see it being different.
yeah,
Those
yeah.
connections, that heritage, that history is being different, and the context is different. So rather than kind of ignore it and just go, "Oh, we've this shared thread, so I have full freedom to do what I want,"
Mm,
we have to pull back and going, "Listen, is that the most appropriate line for you to take?" And that's
mm,
not to silence any voices or to silence the creativity of writers, but sometimes to say the lineage and traditions and experience you have is just as valid without you having to claim more space in the
yeah,
space.
yeah. And there are a couple of people who are doing it very right.
Oh,
More,
very, very right.
yeah, like Morgan Daimler and Morpheus Ravenna, just off the top of my head, they're two who would be friends of mine anyway. Vivian Armstrong, that I mentioned earlier, who's doing tourism, and I've worked professionally in tourism for a long time, and I'm very aware of how wrong that is usually gotten, where, I mean, we're talking about connection to sites and you don't kind of wander up and just take from a site or ask from a
But
site
it's
without
kind of going,
building.
this is my experience.
Yeah, yeah. And,
Yeah,
there's,
because I've come across a few people now, especially tour guides,
mm,
um, horrendous. You
yeah,
know, absolutely
yeah,
horrendous. And you're like going,
yeah,
I don't understand why you don't have a set standard within the country, anyways.
yeah,
So we've so much heritage and history that we
yeah,
should be able to standardize it and make sure that it's appropriate use, because that only embellishes and gives a lot more freedom to the sheer inaccuracies of some situations.
yeah. And it's a problem, and it's even a problem for people, who are native and who are born and bred here and are still kind of feeding on the diet of the bullshit that we've all grown up with, and aren't kind of doing their own research or, and it like it is it's a problem even within the country. Never mind before we start getting into, people just looking to make a quick buck over, cashing in on somebody's Irish ancestry.
Yeah,
So, oh, look, we'll not solve it today, but it's good to talk, right?
we'll solve it someday together.
Someday.
Yeah,
Working on it, working on
yeah,
it. Okay, so we have another question.
okay.
Um, so when you did kind of start to, I suppose, tap into like mainstream pagan culture that would have dealt with Irish spirituality or
Mhm.
and it's kind of hard every time I ask this question, like it's hard to draw a line, like what is Irish spirituality and what is neo-pagan, and like
Yes.
there weren't resources, but in Ireland, like we had to kind of fumble around and try and find stuff. So how did you practically go about kind of getting started with books, courses, events, people you met? Now I know you mentioned Sharon and the group there, so was there anything else?
I am a huge advocate of libraries.
Mm,
And most people don't usually utilize libraries, thinking that they only have the books on the shelves, rather than the library is a network of people and
yeah,
resources.
yeah,
If they don't have it, they can find it,
yeah.
and read everything, including the really gammy, dodgy books. You know how to tell it, going, oh dear God, I didn't stop at chapter 3, but I've tried. Because that way we develop our sense of discernment of that doesn't ring true, or
Mm,
that is a flash of fancy, which sounds quite nice, or
mm,
this is a hidden gem I would not have picked up otherwise.
yeah, yeah.
And but read absolutely everything you have, and also allow yourself to be in different spaces. I think that sometimes we, especially within the community, I know kind of in general, if something is just say Pagan Pacific, people feel it's okay to go there rather than going, you can go anywhere. If if there's a festival, there's a feast, if even of different communities and kind of like Diwali, and then we have Hanukkah, kind of this way, like explore those aspects and those traditions as a point of contrast for ourselves, make more aware of what we have. Of the I suppose, without being disrespectful, there's a lot of movement that is very internalized. There's like, as I said before, I could not vibrate myself out of a sock, and I mean that very, very honestly. There's a lot of experiences that I 100% believe people have, and people, it is their truth, and I have had my own. But there's a sense of having to validate that in discussion, or just discover going, this is a certain chakra that does this, and you're like going, I'm not quite sure what that's about, and B, a lot of the material that we have does not make sense. One of my favorite is, especially when I have a herbal background, is that elemental and planetarial associations of herbs. And you sit down going, this herb is Jupiter, it's from Jupiter and associated with it, and you're going, who decided this? Seriously. You're like, and even if, for instance, I pick up cinnamon and people go, cinnamon is fire. It's like, cinnamon for me it's a fire, but it's earthy. It's a bark of a tree. It just, and it kind of just this thing. Going, have you actually picked up cinnamon? Going, is that really what you're connecting with? What's the history of it? What's the community lore of where it's grown? And like, allow yourself to push beyond the simple instructions. And the 101 kind of references. Now, a lot of them are very valid and very important, but they may not always be the simple truth. Sometimes they're there to give us guidelines, and other times they're there just to be sold.
Yeah.
And kind of I suppose the most spiritually engaged people I've ever met, two in particular, have been very random, but on one level seeming, but very, very important, almost designed. One person I met when I was in college, I was on a placement, and the person I had been told had a very specific mental health disorder. And she turned out to be one of the most free, powerful, beautiful people I've ever met. She would wear what she wanted. She would write poems on walls. She would decide that in the middle of a conversation, don't want to talk to you, and walk away. And that was interpreted as being brash and rude and kind of not having the social elegances and that causing problems, rather than that woman was herself.
Yeah.
That woman was free, and that woman was powerful because she was who she was. And I think that when we practically start from the place of being the most authentic you as you possibly can. Be nervous, be awkward. You will break things, you will upset people. If you really try, people will see beyond it.
Yeah.
But really, read everything, go through everything to know, is it for you or not for you? Pay for quality, not for quantity.
Yeah.
Kind of, and always aim for the authentic voice for people who have lived the experience.
Yeah.
Or have a living connection with that tradition, or kind of evolution of it, or something is real rather than someone else has done a course, has done a course from some.
Yeah.
Connected to the source material at all.
Yeah, yeah. And that's actually very, very common now, where I'm finding where people are kind of setting themselves up as teachers, and they're only in a fucking wet weekend, and like, okay, so age doesn't always, equal wisdom. Obviously, we know that. But at the same time, like, it's obvious when you come to a person who is walking the truth of it, who is living the truth of it. It's so much more obvious than somebody who, has, you ask them a question and they have to kind of check the book under the table, Now, I have checked the book under the table, but I actually don't check it under the table. I say, right, I don't actually know the answer to that. I need to go and find out. And, I know somebody who does, or I can find the answer. I know how to find the answer. I know where to find the answer, or I can give you the resources so you can find your own fucking answer, which is...
Don't be perfect, be authentic.
Exactly. And it's so important. And, just to kind of bring it back a little bit to what you said there, and back even again to the relationships and building relationships with sites, I really firmly believe that carries through to anything that you're doing. So whether that's herbs, as you mentioned, or deities, or sacred sites, or feckin' tarot cards, or whatever you're doing, you
Yeah,
know.
put the effort in. My God, put the
Exactly.
effort,
Exactly.
actual
Do the work
effort, and
and
because
build
I
those
think,
relationships.
yeah, because we want it to be easy. We want to get there, and we want it to be smooth and casual. And they have like, I've achieved it, rather than going, it is a lifetime. People often make commitments to deity and forms of sites that I would be quite scared to make.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of like going, oh, you're going to every day. Are you really? You're going to light candles for them every day, every day, every day, because like when shit goes down, shit goes down, and you don't want to be there going, oh, you forgot Tuesday, did you? Yeah, you know, you have to be very careful of what you're committing yourselves to, because it
Yes.
is often can be for periods of time, but it can be for life, and life can change.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and if you've made a commitment, it is raw, and
Yeah.
and they are not afraid of calling it in.
No, no. And, you know, the other part of the relationships and building those relationships is the contracts, you know, and I'm always singing about the contracts, you know, and make sure you check into the fine print of those contracts, because, you know, all of our fucking deities are really, you know,
Yeah.
they're all tricksy bastards, you know.
And I think it's even how some people interpret the sheep is like, and we call them Grewog. And the Grewog are not the Peter Pan clapping your hand. They will stab you, take your children, and burn your house. You know, you have to be so very. And you're like, going, oh, I met them in the woods today, and you're like going, do you have all your limbs? Are you okay? And
Is your
like
liver still intact, you know, like,
this,
because they like liver.
and hopes, and they can feast off emotions and experiences.
Oh,
Hence, they steal brides.
yeah.
Production with the idea of this is life, and so I often kind of worry that people, oh, sure, the fairies live down the road, because I grew up in Cluna, which is on the foothills of Knockmay, which is called Castle Hackett,
Yeah.
which is the homestead of King Vara.
Yeah.
And the kind of the Grewog, who obviously would be kind of, we do associate them with Connacht and the kind of the jousting and the feasting and the riding. And my family would never camp on that site, and it's quite a large site, and my family would never allow you, even if they say, oh, sure, there's an old fish hog, you're not going up there at night. You're not, genuinely, you'll fall, something happened to you, you're not going up there at night.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense of like going, that respect is very, very, very real. Now, that's to say that it's not held by everyone in the community. Obviously, there's diversity, but there's a real fear, because things can happen. So you need to foster a real living respect. Otherwise, you're going down. You really are going down. And like, I often kind of would leave with a lot of concerns where people would turn up and kind of claim a space and try to engage very forcefully with a sacred site, especially with a very kind of, and I find King Vara's presence quite strong, in this expectation of, you'll come to me because I'm here, rather than I going, oh dear Lord, you know, would not be going there. Would keep well out of the way. You know, if they want to speak to you, they will find you and talk to you themselves.
Yeah. And just for anybody who's not of the native brogue, what Owen is referring to specifically is a site called Knockma, which has associations with Queen Maeve as well, I believe. It's
Yes.
one of her
We know her
potential
as Maeve the
burial
White.
sites. Yes. It's near Headford in County Galway, would be the closest town, would it?
No, Tuam is the closest town. It's just outside the N17 between Clare, Galway and Tuam.
Perfect, right? Just for anybody who wants to look at a map. And Fionvar is the king of the Connacht fairies. So that would be, and Finvar is how you pronounce it,
Yeah, we call him Finvara.
Finvara, yeah.
And he has his wife is Una, and then he has like 11 children, and there's all that kind of crack happening. And but no, it's that there's the sense of the identity, how we color and we talk about him, tell stories about him, but also there's the presence, and there's the actual, if you it's worth spending time there. There's no way to reproduce it. Go spend time and understand that you need to get your shit together before you go talking to people who and beings that they're not frightened of tearing you apart.
No.
You know, these are raw aspects of nature, the living breath of the land. You are small. And possibly, as the saying goes, I know, read the kind of the dragons, that you're probably tasty.
Crunchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people just kind of wander into that. I can't even count the amount of times I've heard people talking about, you know, drawing fairies into your home, and you know, Owen? Did you see the Fairy Door Company? there's actually a video on the YouTube there about it, where they actually have these little, you go into Super Value and you'll see these little
Yeah.
box sets, right? Where you can go in and, you know, you buy a fairy door and you put it in your child's bedroom, and there's
Yep.
actually a fucking contract in the box that you have to sign over your child and access to your child. And
Yeah,
myself
and
and
a doorway
Vivian,
into your home.
oh man,
Yeah.
myself and Vivian saw this and we were like, do you know, like, I swear that fairy door company is run by the she. I swear. That's how they're making their money now, you know.
Yeah, sure. And having access to your children. Yeah.
And yes, it's fucking terrifying. And you know, I'm very very pleased to hear, and have been very pleased to hear, that there's still a very kind of healthy living tradition around it. Grewog, is that what you call them?
Yeah, Grewog.
Grewog, yeah. So is that plural, Grewog?
Yeah. The singular and plural is just kind of
The Grewog, yeah.
Yeah, Grewog.
Yeah, cool. So do you want to talk, just as we're kind of on that, do you want to talk a little bit about, you have, you'd mentioned that part of the identity, the traveller identity, would be in the language. So there is a whole separate language, isn't there?
Yes, yeah, and it's been recognised by, obviously, by Europe and linguists and everything, and highly debated, as all things always are when it comes to the community. I think academically it's called Shelta. Within the community it's known as Gammon, and when it's very mixed it's known as Cant. Most people would have a good understanding of Cant, and a lot of the words have become part of the wider lexicon, which is like moniker for name. Gammy for something that would be kind of the best. I know in Limerick a lot of people say Bure, which is one of,
right,
fiend for man, and kind of over, and even when it comes to horses, horses are called curry, so a horse brush is a curry brush.
Right, yes.
So and it's become a part of the overall kind of language, but due to, I suppose, the oppressive nature of the communities over time and history, not as used or celebrated as it was. But I think it's very, very important to use it when and if possible.
And it's beautiful.
Especially by organisations, because I am like, there's a good few travel civic organisations in the country. I'm like going, if you're releasing information, for the love of God, at least have your title in the language, so you know it's there. Because people just don't know it's there.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a part of the Irish language, part of the Irish heritage. And now that it's recognised, it'll be, thankfully, more research and study groups and youth group and apps, and all the possibilities are nearly endless. So I'm expecting a huge revival. And it's overdue, but it's also really exciting, because just like Irish, there's some things you can't say, and there's sort of things you can only say in such beautiful ways.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. So is it like a fully, forgive my ignorance now, but is it a fully formed language? Like, so two people who know the language could sit down and have a full-blown conversation, and would it be recognizable within English, or if somebody knew Irish, or like, is it?
There's a lot of commonalities with Irish. Undoubtedly, they had the same kind of I suppose linguistic root, but it would have changed over time. For instance, we'd say some of the words have been deliberately changed. For instance, like boy can be cam instead of a kind of Mac. So there's, but at the same time, but when you have 47,000 people or older generations having the same word, it wasn't just changed by a singular family. It was an evolution of the language. And a lot of the names were changed. For instance, like Gidge is Bridget.
Right.
Sarog is Margaret. So there's a lot of words that kind of, and I'd have a member of my kind of wider family called Gidge, and we all know Gidge is Bridget, and the person still known as Gidge. And when you call some of the white communities called Gidge, and you're like, oh, that makes absolutely no sense to me. So no, her name is Gidge. No, it's Bridget. It makes sense to me and to her, but like more than like, and. Yeah, and like there's a good few books out there actually over the years. Very few, I think it's about 4 have only been written by members of the community. But I know that like Leyland, Sampson, kind of Mears, have written books. But in more recent time, you'd have like Richard Waters. Cawley's book is quite good. It's quite a small book, but it's quite good. And then the Kildare group brought out Can't, but Will, and which is based on a work kind of settings for children to actually realize you have a lot of those words.
Fantastic.
You know, you have a lot of those words about actually recognizing them, going, people from the majority community may not recognize when you say them, but become accustomed to the context of the conversation. So what you're explaining gets across.
Yeah, and I mean, things like gammy, you know, having a gammy leg or a gammy eye, or, you know, they're very, very common in Ireland. And as you say, it's just not recognised. It's not kind of respected as part of your tradition. So again, we will put resources if Owen would
Yes.
be kind enough
Oh
to
yeah.
provide links, and particularly again stuff that's coming from
Actually,
within the
there's a
community.
beautiful song sung by Jack Delaney, as Gammon, Fully in Gammon, and it's absolutely
Oh,
beautiful. And actually, I send a link to it so you can
do
actually
yeah,
hear what
yeah.
it really sounds
That's
like. Because a
fantastic.
lot of the tradition was through the poetry and the singing,
Yeah,
and I actually quite like people who are Gaeilgeoirs listening to it, like, oh, get that, no idea,
yeah,
get
yeah,
that one, no idea,
yeah.
and so it shows the commonality of it, also the diversity within the Irish traditions.
Yeah, and and I have to wonder, like, it's kind of it's tricking off all sorts of like when you look at words that were deliberately changed, like, is that a secret society kind of thing? Is that like so so people couldn't
Yeah,
understand?
thousands of people plotting. And yeah, we don't know, and there's been so much review. There's
Yeah,
been, like, I think at the moment there's Maria Ryder. I think her research was actually quite interesting, but her exposure to the community was for 6 weeks. She spent six
right.
weeks with a community in the community centre in Ennis, and had because people weren't speaking it to her and
Yeah.
weren't overly speaking when she was around. There's the development of all these ideas. Like, you spent 6 weeks with a certain family. Like, there's thousands of us. Come out and talk
Yeah,
to them.
yeah,
A lot of it might just survive in some families in how people bless themselves.
yeah.
With certain words, or
Mm.
things like Galan Mooney, like, oh dear God.
Mm.
Um, and that, or mushy mommy, which is a very very popular one. It's just like it's more of an explanation of like going, don't know what to do, mushy mommy,
Oh, mushroom.
and
Yeah.
which we can casually use, but I think a lot of the research is very off-putting, and it doesn't seem to be reflective of when people actually talk to community members. But
Yeah,
there is a market there for people to research our community.
yeah,
I mean, they're one of the most researched ethnic minority groups in Europe. Sometimes to our own detriment.
yeah,
But a lot of that research does not come from internal voices, so it doesn't have the contextual pieces. But
yeah.
definitely, there's a good few. Even the work that isn't ours, read it. Like, read Leyland. Some of his stuff is very very unusual, but read it.
Mm.
Kind of John Simpson, especially. Yeah, interesting correlations of some of his ideas and some of his translations. I would see them very very differently, but it gives it a good stab.
Mm.
Because a very good stab, especially around sayings and stories, and he has the full
Yeah.
translations of them. But I'll give you the links because they're quite interesting.
Do and like the other side of that, like, I totally get where you're coming from with, kind of read everything and all the rest of it,
Mm.
but it's very different if you're totally new to something. It's very different when you start off and you get the wrong notions implanted in your head.
Oh yeah,
It's
that's
the
true.
difference between kind of reading the Lady Gregory story and then going back to the old lore, and getting
Yeah,
a like a proper as proper as we have translation of it. Um, because you've got all that fucking layers of misunderstanding and miscommunication and misdirection in a lot of,
yeah,
because
it's true. Yeah, yeah, it
'cause
happened a lot actually.
fuck you, English lady.
The 1953 Folklore Commission, which was the Irish Tinker Questionnaire,
Mm.
which is in the Folklore Commission in UCD, if I'm not mistaken. And some of the translations are really, really hilarious. Like, people saying like, how do you say good morning? And it
Mm.
was like, Yulgami Bure, which is like, you are a horrible woman. you know, and like, and it's been described as, this is what this means.
Yeah, and they're
And
writing it down in good faith, and
yeah,
it's just
and sometimes it's just some people just having
it's
like
just
divil with
Irish
them,
people taking the
and
piss. Yeah,
other people like going, I'm not telling you anything.
yeah, yeah,
You know?
and totally fucking understandably, like, in
Yeah.
fairness.
But I think that it is important though to read the good, but
Mm.
learn to discern the stuff that just is just bizarre,
Yeah,
because we're
well,
not short of bizarre.
if we're going to be posting resources down below
Oh, I know,
for
big
the
quality ones.
YouTube,
Yeah,
yeah, and we'll give people a good start in it, and then by all means I'd say read more widely, um, because you're absolutely right and you're spot on, and you need to kind of be able to identify the dross so that you'll know it when you see it. Right. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So, what sort of things do you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal basis to explore or express your Irish spirituality?
I maintain several altars within family
Mm-hmm.
spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Most very importantly maintain the kind of the birthday celebrations of kind of the people who are no longer with us.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the past and there's the dead. Everybody passes, but not everyone has to die. So one way is for people to live forever is when they're remembered, and that is incredibly important to remember for people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, like birthdays and the days they pass, making their favorite food, finding out what was their favorite song, what did they like, what was their colors, having that active living conversation is very, very important. Spending time in nature. I mean, not only do I get cranky and I get cranky, um, so spending time in nature to just discover how things change, not just the shift in nature around you in the seasons, but in the land itself, because it can be incredibly sensitive, and it can respond to the most unusual things that you may not have considered. Reverence around specific saint days, especially as like most members of my family would have a saint that have a very high, I suppose, affinity with.
Mm-hmm.
And I always kind of find that is a shift from a deity kind of form of one another. Like my
Yeah.
sister, um, eh, deep reverence to the Teresa of the Little Rose,
Mm-hmm.
but I associated with Sarah Cali more kind of the kind of the who's the kind of folklore associated, which is often in the wider kind of nomadic community of Europe, of like she's dark and she's mysterious and she's clearly a traveler, and she's clearly traveled well, and
Mm-hmm.
her skin is weather worn, and she's wise, and she helps the Virgin Mary give birth, and so she goes on a journey, and that's her connection. And then my mother would be very connected with Saint Anthony, who very her sign of him was magpies, because magpies find things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then over the years developing it, but most of our families would have a different saint that they're connected with. Mine have shifted over the years, mostly kind of taking the forms of kind of, I suppose, Celtic deities, but making sure that even if I'm in kind of a very Roman Catholic space, that the local saint on the feast day gets recognized, because
Mm.
that's the connection of something else that connected. I may not understand it, but there's always a sense that it's something bigger, because
Mm.
people would not have picked a saint just for the sake of it.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
people had to have that connection in order to
Yeah. And that Saint Teresa that you mentioned.
importance on kind of spiritual hygiene. Like, what, clean the place, burn everything. Yeah, yeah. They, like, I mean, and like people often associate, especially with younger traveler women, like going, they're just cleaning at home. You know, these hours they're going. No, traveler women, bright, intelligent, incredibly kind of, I suppose, kind of a mindful and kind of business minded kind of throughout the community, which is very much fostered. But there is a sense of like going, your space needs to really be clean. That might be a reflection of how we lived quite often outdoors, the infection rates.
Mm.
Um, Unusually though, soil is not dirt.
Mm.
And I don't understand how people have associations that soil is dirty.
Mm.
And you know, like, oh, you're filthy, you're dirty. It's like, soil is not dirt; it's soil.
Mm.
And that's something within the kind of the wider Irish kind of my experience of the community is that soil is associated with dirt. Rather than you clean it, but it's not dirty. Like,
Mm.
being connected to nature is
Mm.
quite clean, and there's quite a lot of obviously positive kind of suppose elements within them, kind of bacteria that we need, and etc.
Mm. But
etc.
that's colonialism as well.
Yes.
That's that's because the overlords were never out in the fields, so the
Mm.
workers would be coming in and they're dirty, and it's
Yeah.
outside their experience.
Sure, but I think a lot of it goes around kind of sacred spaces. For instance, like, I manage a kind of a travel-specific education center that was open for the wider community, duty to travelers. I think we have a grotto. We have, like, for instance, 2 weeks ago, I wasn't feeling very well, and I kid you not, on the bench behind me at work, I received just filling in a red cord,
Mm.
holy oil, a cross, a small cross of Medjugorje, rosary beads, and a small bead blessed by a nun in Cork.
Right.
Yeah. So, but it's all, and like, it's
It's all
all
magic.
connected.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't a sense of going, like, again, stick a Holy Mary on it, you're fine.
Mhm.
And to the sense of kind of that giving and sharing of those things to other people is very important. If someone is ill, there's the onus on you going, this is an option. Now,
Mm.
like, kind of like, without being rude, and I know from the wider community, people feel trust of like going, oh, have you done this? Did you try
Mm.
that?
Mm.
While within my community, it's facilitated. It's rude not to.
Mm.
And that cultural shift is quite unusual. For instance, like going, people often experience, as well as how we socialize is very different. We will spend the majority of our time traditionally outdoors. The community octave is quite high, People might not always feel very well in social spaces, go around in groups. So if you see a group of travelers speaking quite loudly going in a group, then the inference can be, oh, that's a bit unusual. What's going on here? Because people don't socialize that way. And I think within my spiritual practice, spend time with your people,
Yeah.
especially your older people. There's the living books that exist in our lives, and we just need to remind them to turn the pages and get
Yeah. Get those stories.
as much as we possibly can.
No, absolutely.
Oh yeah, and some of those stories are fascinating, and we have our own versions of all of the elder tales, like the Sam of Knowledge, or ending in slightly different. Not only was the thumb was burnt, but after the meal had finished, a traveler woman came and took the bones and made a soup, a broth. And
Oh,
from that broth, she gained the power of wisdom. So while he had knowledge, but knowledge without the application of wisdom is quite dangerous. But wisdom without the ability to apply it is quite inept. So it was a story of the communities returning to one another. But
that
we
is
were always
fascinating.
in our stories. Because you wouldn't tell stories of people going, well, that person a traveler, and a lot of the elder God and kind of heroes we consider travelers. They were one of us. Oh Lord, and he travelled here. He did this here. Where was he living? He lived wild and free, and we're like, oh, actually, he's one of us. Yeah, he was one
Yeah.
of us.
Well, the Dagda, I mean, come on.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Oh God,
Yeah, he
yeah,
had all the spaces, but he didn't own any of them.
yeah,
He traveled. He traveled the land. That was what he
yeah.
did.
And even the story like a Ermid, a kind of Ermid's
Yeah.
kind of especially Leicester Ermid or the voice Ermid was a very kind of I suppose well used kind of traditional remedy. Um, she taught us herbalism because again the herbs being scattered, she met
Yeah.
us and
Yeah.
our paths crossed, and when she'd find something she'd share it with a different family, and she's a part of our history. Like I'm going like,
Oh,
oh yeah, she may not be a traveler, but she was with travelers.
yeah.
She traveled with
Yeah.
travelers, and
Mm.
there was that cross sharing of information.
That is fascinating. Really is. And the just as you were talking about the traveller woman coming along in the Salmon and Knowledge story, the wisdom, it reminded me of Shannon, of the way the
Yes,
waters rose up,
yeah,
and there's something going on there, and there's the broth that you mentioned. I just did a site visit to a Fulloch Fia, and I had a very strange experience with being in a bath of broth, and that was
okay,
and it just obviously personal gnosis here and kind of mad rambles, but there's so many threads that are kind of flying a bit loose, I think, and you know there is that potential to kind of reweave them and
very much so.
form a new pattern or a new practice that's very authentic and very relevant
And
to.
just looking at like sometimes even just looking at it from a different angle can be
Mm,
at least entertaining.
mm,
And
mm,
open up doors of okay, I didn't consider it that way. Because
yeah.
again, the community views those spaces and those stories differently.
Mm,
Like, would view them differently in the way that the majority culture might interpret them.
mm. And has anybody ever kind of like, obviously we've a lot of versions of writing down the stories
Mhm.
in the settled community. Has anybody ever written the stories from your community's perspective? Is there a
Of the
book of
Navin,
those or?
the, there's some books which survive from the 30s.
Mm,
um Most of the shift towards scripting, because of the very very strong oral history,
mm,
started around the 70s and really kicked
mm,
off in the late thousands.
mm.
But there's a huge amount still there. There's a huge
That's
amount still there. I know at the moment there's a few people who are proactively engaging with that,
that's
and
fantastic.
we're actually working with two teams around like creating those and make sure they're archived and shared and celebrated. And even within those tales, there's just such diversity in such geographical areas. Like people claiming, no, that happened in Kerry. It was in Kerry, and no, kind of different stories, and kind of our name for God is Gallion,
Yeah,
and Gallion is a smith. So our name for God is a smith.
yeah,
So the one of the earlier versions of the creation. So it isn't really a, I suppose, the creation of life. I suppose kind of story is that the word was made. The world was built. So
wow.
so we kind of even in the language, the world was built,
Yeah.
and the association of it was travelers who made the first horseshoes and the first riglets, which were the first signs of protection from the Griwog, because it was the first
The
time that
iron, yeah.
people had taken from the land and built it and turned it from their will. That was like going, we're not as fragile as they think we are.
Mm.
And it was the first attempt to claim a sense of protection. And I know a lot of our elder people kind of claimed that was us. That was us.
Mm.
And which I always find quite interesting. And also kind of association with tin. Tin is a native to Ireland. It comes from Wales. And so even the words kind of a lot of people would know the community as tinkers, while one of the area words for the community is mincair, which is someone with loads of trades.
Mm.
And over the years, especially it has become a tinker, rather than a mincair is someone who has loads of trades or abilities.
Like an Ildánach almost.
Yeah, and the idea of like going, like you would need a lot of trades, especially if you were from a very large community.
Mm.
To say, I know Galway has a very specific, quite I suppose, collective communities. If you were in the same area, like your trade might have been metalwork, but if
Mm.
there's a family there who's already doing that, you need something else. Like you
Yeah.
need to be able to survive there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the more trades you had, and the more skills you had, the more likely you are going to live.
Mm.
So we were people who were the multi-traded, those skilled people, and like that's how we named ourselves. And our name for God was a smith, so someone who
Mm.
created and built the world, didn't just make it, built it. So there's that again, it's a sense of effort and commitment and purposeful construction.
Oh, and it's like, as ever, it's fascinating talking to you about this because there's so much that, I've been instinctively maybe kind of aware of through the years, that when I'm talking to you, it kind of comes clear, or at least I'm not so fucking alone in it. Like, I realize that it's not just me having these mad notions, because there's just, oh, thank you. There's a lot going
Oh
on.
no, you're very, very good. The power of sharing, the power of sharing.
So we've talked about, traveling within the land and the relationships to sites. So, I mean, I include this question because I do interview people who are obviously outside Ireland sometimes as well. So how important is it to you personally to be in Ireland physically? Um, so that's
On a
going to be different,
personal level, it's
Mm.
incredibly important.
Mm.
Um, and I think there's a personal sense of connection, but also there's the sense of the heritage and history throughout the entire land. Where I grew up, um, I knew every corner.
Mm.
I had the tales of every field.
Mm.
I had been told different trees, the history behind them. I could show you where my grandfather's grandfather was born,
Mm.
and where my aunt was born, and
Mm.
what river someone passed away from. The entire land was a living book of history, and
Yeah.
that's something I've never been able to step away from. That where we were, it wasn't just, oh, that's a field, that's Mr. Murphy's field. That's Mr. Murphy's field, and this tree was here, and that land was there, and such family lived there, and you don't go over there, and this is a story that happened here, and the time the kind of carry kind of happened here, and a whole story. So it wasn't just fields and land. It
Yeah.
was, it's the stories, and it's the living experience, and that's a part of me for Ireland. Now, not everyone can come here. There's obviously a huge, there's privileges for people who can travel,
Yeah.
um, but being here, it's undescribable, the connections you can create, because they're not intellectual, they're raw and primal.
Mm.
And I think giving ourselves the opportunity to have that, um, you can't replace it.
No.
You can't replace it.
And you can't, I mean, even trying to describe it, trying to put words on it, trying to, I mean, it is, as you say, it's an incredible privilege to be here and to have grown up with that. And what you're describing, I think is kind of is relevant for anybody really who's grown up. I was going to say rurally, but
Hmm.
even in some urban areas as well.
Yeah.
Like there is that living landscape. There is that community history that you can tap into. That again, the generations now are kind of stepping away from a little bit, sadly. And I think really, like, the coming of the cars has kind of changed Ireland very, very much, where you're moving from place to place, and instead of kind of walking through the fields and knowing all the nooks and crannies and the ins and outs, and kind of going home across the fields from the pub or from your friend's house or whatever, you're not literally walking the land anymore. Or going on a bicycle or a horse and cart or a donkey, as
But
I
we're
travelled.
very insulated at times, rather
Mm.
than actually, like
Yeah.
the air smells different at different places.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly, like air, like the wind smells different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And
Of
the
course, it's
water.
going to, because I've Yeah, and the water feels different. Like
Mm,
there are places where the water is thick and heavy, and
mhm,
there is places where the water is joyful.
mm.
And
And
we kind of,
yeah.
and almost dries quicker.
Yeah.
And there's places where you will get wet. It
Mm,
doesn't rain.
mm.
We have drizzle, and yet you're so it moves in the sense that there's an intelligence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think there's no and unless you've experienced it, you can't explain it.
Mm,
I think
yeah.
I don't think we have the kind of the language to
We don't have the
describe.
language in English anyway,
No,
certainly, to do it, unfortunately.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, it doesn't work that way.
Mm.
But you can feel it.
You can. And, I think and again, working in tourism, I would have seen that very, very starkly through the years of people who, they finally kind of make it on this pilgrimage effectively to Ireland, the spiritual life journey kind of that they're making, and everything just clicks into place. It's like they, like, again, theoretically they understood it before, but now they fucking get it,
Yeah,
and it is an experience, like, and it's part of my work to try and connect people who can't physically be here, and it actually is fucking heartbreaking. Like, I would love to just put everybody on a boat or a plane and get them
yeah,
over here to experience that, and I
yeah,
wish I could do that, but we have to find ways, obviously, for people who can't, for whatever reason, whether it be economic or physical, or whatever the reasons that people can't physically be here. There are other ways of connecting in, and it's not that that's a lesser experience, it's a different
no,
experience,
it is
and
different. And once you
yeah.
understand this difference, you can just be as legitimate in the connection.
Mm,
Um, but those nuances are different. So as long as we're aware they're different,
yeah.
I always suggest to people who come, like, get off the beaten path. If
Yeah.
it's heavy with tourism, chances are it's been adjusted.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
find the nook and crannies, find the
Yeah.
like like I know a lot of people can often I often worry of, especially of tourists who come very, very well dressed, and I go, get yourself a coat and get yourself and, get yourself across that field, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and
And fucking forget about the umbrella, lads, because the umbrella's not going to do you any good.
they don't last for long. They don't
It's only
last for long.
getting in the way. I
Yeah,
promise you, it's only getting in the way. A good old
yeah.
raincoat now is what
And
you
if you
need.
wear white, you're very brave. You're very and kind of like get out there and find, and you will discover things. Like, for instance, the area I'm living in now, my neighbors right next door, they're not from the area, but they're in their 60s and have lived here originally, so they're in and off for although he doesn't describe himself as Clondalkin, for over 20 years. I did not know in the field behind us there is a 15th century church covered in
Right.
trees,
Wow.
and that was a part of a large, one of the wider areas of Deanrath gets his name from. And dumbfounded about, absolutely dumbfounded. And the idea that they were going to build on it, what came as the second church
Oh,
one. But once I brought him down, going, yep, see behind that tree, let's go in, there is a church. And
wow.
you have lived here all these years.
Yeah.
And he grew up in England, and kind of he never allowed himself to actually explore the area. And now we're very close to having a full on protest of, everyone deserves a home. Please do
Mm.
not build on the graveyard of the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of until you actually get out of our insulated little boxes and actually feel the wind and crawl through the awkward bushes and get yourself torn to bits, you're never quite going to get it the way it was meant to be experienced. Now you can
Yeah.
get very close to it, but there's
Yeah.
always a little bit of excitement if you can press through that threshold.
Yeah, and like, one of the things that I love, and it's a joy and a passion to me, is that I get fucking lost every single month trying to do all my site visits, when I'm
Yeah,
going, and and I've no sense of direction anyway. I'm dyspraxic, so I literally can't tell kind of north from south or anything like that, and I get turned around. But I actually think that that's part of the authentic experience. When I'm doing a site visit, and I'm doing a little video diary and a photo diary, and trying to kind of capture as much as I can for people, a huge part of that is just fucking getting lost and crawling through the bushes, as you say, and turning your ankle in the field because somebody's left a well there where you weren't
yeah,
expecting one to be, or running across the fucking territorial goats, which happened a couple of months ago, who the Billy decided that we weren't getting anywhere near his nannies or his kids,
yeah,
and that site visit had to be abandoned, and it's just, that's Ireland,
yes,
that's what you're not going to get on those CIE tours, or those, those Americans who are bringing you over, who haven't actually spent any significant time here and haven't done that, haven't crawled through those fucking brambles,
I
or
don't have the relationship, and the
no,
most important is the relationship.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And whether that's with the land or the people or both, ideally, you just, that's what you need. If you're going to spend your money and come to Ireland, make it real,
Yeah.
make yourself uncomfortable, make sure that you're getting out there and pushing those fucking comfort zones. And it doesn't matter if you can get coffee that you like or not. It really doesn't.
No.
It doesn't matter. And just forget about that, leave it at the door, and just come and have that experience of the land, and connect in to the experience. It's not a visit, it is an experience.
Mm-hmm. I think very much. Yeah, we're not meant to be visited. We're meant to be experienced. I think that's
Yeah.
quite good.
Yeah, yeah, and there's so many layers to it, and it isn't. You can't describe it, and you can't describe it because it's going to be different for everybody, and depending on where somebody lands. And I firmly believe, and I've seen it time and time again, people end up exactly where they're supposed to be if
Yes.
they let themselves um, just go with it. If you can kind of give yourself over to that. I'll never forget, actually, I got a text message about a couple of months ago. I got a text message from my friend Vivian,
Yeah.
who does that. She brings the people over, but one of the things she does is she comes over and she fucking spends a month like crawling around Beara and meeting deer and swimming in lakes, and
Get to know
so
everybody.
exactly. So I get this text message from her one day where she is actually going around, because they've a tour coming over at Bealtaine, and she is going around, and she's apologizing to me, and I'm like, what? And she says, I need to apologize to you and I need to apologize to Ireland. And I was like, what are you apologizing to me for? Like, and she goes, well, you're the only one that can hear me right now, and you're a representative that I have access to, so I'm apologizing to you as well. And I was like, what did you do? And
What a grave injustice has happened.
where's this going? Like, do I need to come rescue you? Like, And she's like, no, no, no. She said, I was trying to force a tour. I was trying to force a path. I had an itinerary. I thought that I had places I needed to be, and I've just been turned around and around and around. And I still don't even know really where she was coming from, because she was off on her own in the middle of fucking Kerry. And, I don't know what happened. Right. Right. But it really kind of opened it up to me that, here was a person who is coming in new and raw and fresh to it, and trying our best, like, to actually have those experiences. And and I can't recommend that enough, that you really just let Ireland lead you.
Yeah, the old saying, like, if you get lost, turn your jacket inside out and keep going.
That's it. Yeah. And actually, it's always been, again, no sense of direction, but it's always been the rule in our car, or any kind of journeys we go on, or any traveling that we do, or anything like that, from when the kids were young, that you're never lost unless somebody's shouting. That's my rule. Anything else is an adventure.
Yeah.
And it really is, like, and it doesn't matter if we're walking or driving or wherever we end up, like, because you always end up getting out of the car anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I do anyway. But oh, look, that's an interesting thing. Let's follow that.
Yeah, and we are in Ireland, so no matter how lost you are, if you keep going, you will find the coast. Yeah, you will find. Trust me, you will find the coast.
The worst thing that's going to happen is, if you really, really, really kind of have a serious adventure, you're going to drive for 6 hours and end up at the wrong end of the country. That is literally the worst that could happen.
Yeah,
So
and for the worst things, that's not a bad thing.
it's not a bad thing at all.
No.
It'll be Kerry or Donegal, and sure, there's definitely worse places you could be.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So if you could make every person beginning on this path, so, interested in Irish spirituality, if you could make them read just one book, and this is always the hardest question that interviewers have to answer, or interviewees rather.
I wish I had done a lot more.
Just one book, like, because now it's not that it's the only book that they'll ever read, but if you could kind of guarantee that this was the baseline that everybody had read, what would that book be?
The Tain, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, no. See, I can't pick just one. I think that would do ourselves an injustice. Like, I mean, get out there. I mean, I have a love sometimes of the Ulster cycles, and there's no, yeah. God. No,
Mhm.
no. Read everything. Get yourself a library card. Get yourself a library card. Don't do it to yourself. Yeah, get yourself
Yeah.
a library card.
Okay. Okay. Fuck this question, Laura. We're moving on.
Yeah, no, no, no. Yeah, no. This does not me with my worldview. Yeah, one is never enough. No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fair enough. So that's the
Oh, and
end of
actually,
our.
before we move on, you have to mention books like there is your own. Because if you like story archaeology,
Mm,
like native voices,
mm.
from people who have the experiences. But you see, again, you can't just pick one.
No,
You
there
kind
is
of
that. Yeah.
different
Yeah.
voices, different versions, different genders,
Mm,
different histories,
mhm,
different kind of different time periods that like
mm,
you're going to miss unless you read up more.
mm.
You were never going to get the full picture,
Yeah.
but you can get a lot more of the brushwork, and the more you read.
Yeah. And I
And
suppose that's
be
yeah.
nosy. My God, be
Be
nosy.
nosy. Be
Ask.
nosy.
I mean,
Irish love a bit of nosiness.
yeah. Oh Jesus, I mean, it's a cultural pastime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I like that actually, and not just because you mentioned mine, obviously, but I like that advice to read native voices, and if you have to start somewhere, start there. Absolutely, totally agree with that. So that's the end of our official questions, and we
Okay.
did have one that came in. I am just going to check if I can access my phone. I don't even know where I put it. It's in a fucking drawer somewhere. Um, I'm not sure if anything else came in on the Facebook, but John O'Sullivan asked, and he actually ran the wording of this by me. So again, kind of,
Yeah.
I think it was okay, but I'm not quite sure. So, but it is again with that kind of respectful intent. Given the changes in Ireland driven by foreign influences, Christianity, conversion, British occupation, European Union, etc., how do you feel the Indigenous communities adapted yet still kept their core identity?
Language.
Mm,
There is a saying of like stall to wid, cron the geas, which means stop talking, you kill your family. Um,
wow.
Language is everything. Language is the framework of which we engage, understand, communicate, have the coloring. Oh, also we have a dog in the background just in case it's echoing.
Grant. The Irish love dogs, apparently.
Is what is it? Can you hear him? I'm not sure. He's a little bit upset that he can't get outside, because I'm
Oh.
up here. Um, but he's happy. We had a walk.
Mm,
No, language, and sharing that language and preserving, when possible, that language has kept us alive.
mm,
And also, I think defiance. I think one of those I kind of, especially within Ireland, there's a sense of defiance. There's three things I was told about travellers when I was very young. Is that one, travellers travel. It's in the name.
mm-hmm,
Two, not being able to travel or choosing not to travel does not make you any less a traveller.
mm,
It's the removal of the choice that damages who we are.
right.
And three, we survive. Just like we have survived everything. I mean, the forced assimilation, industrial schools, and segregated education, very specific policies of which stated even the words annihilation. We have survived. And I think understanding and sharing and keeping that history in a very positive sense rather than a fatalistic one has been taken to where, and like there is a lot from our clothing, from like beady pockets to our connection with animals, and there's a lot has been lost, and there's no one doubting it's lost, but it hasn't been lost in such a way that we can't reclaim it. It's
Mm,
still there. It's just
mm,
not always on view, or it has trickled beneath the kind of surface. But
mm.
language, um, by far, is the most powerful tool in maintaining our identity and
That's
preserving who we were in respect of who we could be.
that's powerful.
No.
Yeah, and I think relevant to any kind of community, any minority community who has been hurt in the way that yours has, and the way that ours has, I suppose, in a
Oh
wider
yeah, I mean, no,
wider
it's part of the
context.
overall Irish condition and
Yeah.
history, because I had no doubt that the oppression Ireland felt um, is going on, because oftentimes the oppressed become the oppressors, because that is
Mm-hmm.
what we know,
Mm-hmm.
and that hierarchy of control and needing to create those empowerment of betterment on a cultural level against another kind of aspect of culture still exists, and it's something that
Mm-hmm.
we're learning to adjust and overcome. but would, I believe, be an aspect as that overall colonial approach.
Yes,
Yeah, but did
absolutely.
not break us, did damage, did
Yeah,
wound, but did
yeah.
not break any of us.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everybody who has a role in that and a responsibility in that to, to own it and to be aware of it. I had a very sobering experience actually through the week where I was catching up on I don't know if you're listening to it yet or not, but the Blind Boy podcast,
Yes,
Blind Boy from
yes,
the Rubber Bandits,
yes.
which is fantastic, fantastic, and highly recommended to anybody. But he was talking about the Irish, about a book whose author now I can't remember, but he was talking about a book, basically how the Irish became white. And it was about where when we went to America first, when we were escaping the penal
Yeah.
times and the oppression, all the rest of it. And then, when we got the chance, then like we were side by side with the black communities, for a
Oh,
generation.
I remember seeing some of the signs and the
Yeah,
language. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then, but the sobering part of it for me, where I would, I'm very aware of our of our colonial oppression and of the problems that we've had and all the rest of it, and trying to heal that. But the guilt then of realizing that, within a generation, the Irish turned around and um, did a lot of damage then to the black communities that they had been brothers and sisters with, um, and even looking at, and started to climb and started to use the color of our skin. And I'm saying our because, it could have been any one of us.
Oh, no, no,
Um,
no. I mean, like going like none of us are free
yeah, yeah,
from the privileges of pushing people down.
yeah, yeah,
And it's not just taking advantage. A lot of the time, it is selectively oppressing people.
yeah, yeah,
Because
mm,
we have a sense at the times, because we've been told we can strive when there's someone worse off.
mm,
you know
yeah,
so that's how
yeah,
we strive, and they're going, that takes a lot. It's something that I think we all need to face and look at, review, and keep very high maintenance on,
yeah,
and objective views, and consider, and open to real raw criticism,
hmm,
which is very uncomfortable at times.
yes, yeah,
But like, to hold that space, and my God, feeling uncomfortable is nothing compared to
yeah,
oppressing generations of people.
yeah, yeah.
You know?
And particularly when we're working with ancestry, as you described
Mm.
earlier, and working with your direct ancestors, but also then your cultural ancestors. There, there's none of us, as you say, there's none of us who are free from that, and we do need to hold that space, and we need to make reparations then where we can, and I thought it was very interesting actually, especially given in America what's happening, and there's a lot of Irish names in Trump's cabinet, and there's a
Yes.
lot of people claiming the Irish ancestry there through American politics right now. And we had there was actually reference again in that podcast to when Daniel O'Connell was making his speeches, and a lot of the people were coming over from leaving Ireland and heading off to America. He actually brought, now I should have prepared better, but I can't remember the man's name, but he brought a man of colour over. And a lot of Irish obviously had never seen somebody, at that point in our history, like it would have been very rare, and they made joint speeches together. They traveled the country and they made joint speeches. And Daniel O'Connell, who was obviously the great emancipator, or one of, he specifically said, like, when you leave Ireland, this man and people that look like him are your brothers and your sisters, and
Mm.
what you're leaving is what they're facing, and you never forget that. And if you forget it, you're not Irish anymore. If you don't stand
Wow.
side by side with this man and his people, you are not Irish anymore. And we've forgotten that, we have forgotten that.
That's
And
powerful, and I think that's
mm,
part of our history, that we need to be very open and sharing. That
yeah,
this
yeah,
isn't just like a modern dialogue. This
yeah,
is something we've been aware, and yet we still haven't got our shit together.
yeah,
Um, yeah, but we've been aware of for quite a long time.
yeah,
So what we're doing isn't working,
mm,
and what we need to do a lot more of.
yeah. We need to find ways. And as we said at the start of this, there's a lot of work to be done on a lot of levels. But,
Oh dear God, we have a lot of work.
oh, a lot of work. But you know what? We're doing it, and we'll keep doing it. So I just have on the screen here, how can people best get in touch with you? I have your blog here, which is keepingacampfire.blogspot.ie, just for anybody who's listening on the
Yeah,
audio
random
only.
collection of notions, potions, and colourful pictures mostly.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And it really is amazing. And I know you post in our Irish Magic and Spirituality group sometime, and it's always fascinating. Really, really is.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
striving now to have more family involved,
great.
and wearing them down. The idea of come on, like recently, like having my brother and my father help make Dura. I actually found it quite nice, but there's this image like these strong, kind of toxic masculine men, and they were in the kitchen baking bread, you know,
Oh,
and sharing bread, and obviously and there was a kind of sense of an offering for in a hope, but
mm,
so I think in one way it can be used as a challenge, but also like these, it's a very living tradition that people are very open to, and
yeah.
I've never really found objection to it from the wider community when it's put in a sense of this also belongs to you. It belongs to you in a
Mm,
different way,
mm,
but
mm.
this is a part of your heritage as well.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, particularly how we had, well, I had mentioned the Dagda earlier.
Mm.
Um, when John, the first story that my partner John on Shkeli Biog, who's was the last interview that we did last
Oh,
month.
fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. But the first story that the Dagda gave to him was called Baking Bread. And it
Oh,
was,
okay.
yeah, so it might be interesting actually having a look at that for yourself.
Yeah.
But do you work with the Dagda? Because I'm getting such a
No,
strong.
I have a growing relationship.
Right, right,
Very tentative because
right.
the expectation is quite high, and
Mm,
I'd rather be very open about where commitments can come from,
yeah.
and as a force and direction. My experience has been like going tread very lightly,
Mm,
speak very quietly,
mm.
and when they want you, you'll know.
That's very real and very relevant, I think. um,
Not to scare anybody, but
mm,
yeah,
yeah,
you know, 'cause I
yeah,
think sometimes people hunger for that connection. You're like going, that connection comes from commitment, and commitment means a lot of work.
yeah, yeah. Well,
You
I'll
know, and
put
it's a lot of work.
it is, it is. I'll put a link to the story, the bacon bread story, down
Oh, please
below.
do.
Yeah, and like I said, any kind of, if you want to send me over an email with any kind of links that we've talked on and that kind of
Yes.
thing, and I'll add them all to the mix. And you're on Facebook as well.
Oh, for my
Which
sins. You know, if I only had a life like I have on Facebook. Wonderful.
yeah, so people are welcome, I suppose, to come and get in touch with you
Hmm.
and build those relationships. And
Yes.
I very much look forward, Owen, to seeing more of whatever you're going to be willing to share with us through the years. I mean, like we said, you're only a young man, so
Yes.
I'm sure there's a lot more to come, and we'll definitely get a book out of you at some. I'm going to wear you down at some
Yeah, no,
point. I'm going to wear you
you're going
down
to,
out to
you know, even for myself, like going, yeah, I'm going to,
yeah.
give in, yeah. It has to be,
Just give
commitment
in. That fucking O'Brien one. She
yeah,
won't fucking leave me
wrecking the
alone.
way here today.
Excellent. Excellent. Um, no, that's fantastic. So yeah, look up the links and absolutely get in touch with Owen and follow him on Facebook and follow his work, because there's a lot of real magic there. So thank you very, very much,
Oh, thanks very
Owen,
much,
for the
Laura. It's wonderful.
interview. And we will talk soon.
Yes, definitely. Quality.
Slán.